So I'm doing this video today with the Pacific Ocean as my backdrop. I'm sitting next to this little hut in hopes that it might mitigate some of the wind, because that noise obviously is very distracting, I know. But the reason this is behind me is because it's really a kind of reminiscent of what it is that I want to talk about today. The topic that's been on my mind pretty heavily today is the topic of fear. I did something last night with this group that I'm on that has kind of prompted these thoughts, and I'll share that in a moment. But first I want to just give a little context and do a little self-disclosure. I consider myself someone who, probably relative to other people, has more than their average share of fears and anxiety. I often talk about how some folks are just wired for anxiety where other people aren't, but obviously life experiences lead into those as well. And so everybody has fears. We all have fears. Some of us have anxiety to a lesser or a stronger degree. I have had all of those pretty much throughout my life, as long as I can remember, in different ways. I think that what I know, of course, is that my childhood from a very early age was dominated by the adults in my life who were angry, bitter, abusive, depressed, lots of discord. Obviously there were other things that were wonderful, but those things that were pretty dark were kind of what I grew up from a young age experiencing. So I'm sure that those led into me developing the fears and the anxieties that I have. And they've kind of evolved, as they tend to do. They've evolved over the years in different ways, and as an adult I've learned a lot about how to deal with the anxieties that I've lived with in my adulthood. And I have a lot of insight, and I've gotten a lot of skills, and so I feel really good about that. But those fears are still there. And one of the things I've always been particularly fearful about is water. And particularly being in open water or in the waves, which, being on the beach is obviously, those are things that are around me all the time. I had an interesting experience, a couple of things that I want to talk about. We went yesterday in the evening and watched the sunset from this beach that's a little bit farther from where we are staying, that's known for its surfing because the waves are really giant and beautiful to watch, just absolutely. So there are a lot of surfers and bodyboarders, and so we went to this beach and watched the sunset. We were there for a little, about an hour, hour and a half. And during that time, several of the folks on in our group went in and played and tumbled around in these really, what to me just looked like giant waves. And they came out, after being in the water for a while, they came out absolutely ecstatic and jubilant at the fun that they had had. A couple of them were actually bleeding and bruised from being tossed and tumbled about in these waves, but they loved it, and so it was just fun to watch them do that. And this morning over breakfast, I asked Karina, our retreat leader, who was one of those people, I said, how did you develop your kind of what looks to me like fearlessness in the water, your confidence in these really big waves? And she shared a lovely sentence, thought with me about how, and it's really stuck with me all day, about how her parents, she grew up in Corpus Christi, Texas, and she shared that her parents, when she was a very young child, would take her out to the waves, to the beach, and they would both go out together and they would stand with her beyond the wave line, and just she said she felt safe and cared for by them as they would lift her through the waves, and she never felt unsafe. And she learned as a young child to love the waves and the ocean and to develop that confidence, but she credits her parents with that. And I thought that was a beautiful memory to share. And it sparked in me the thought of how when I was a child I used to go to the beach with my mother, and I'm so grateful for those trips. They were lots of fun, but there was definitely no one in the water to teach me about that, about waves and how to navigate that and safety. And I remember I have pretty strong memories as a child, a young child, being tumbled about in the water and struggling to find the surface and feeling completely terrified and intimidated. And so from then I've always felt those feelings, a little bit of trepidation when I'm in wave water, and I typically don't go out. And so so that was to me like an interesting contrast, and I was so impressed with how they had so much fun in the waves. So after that, so the thing I want to share is after that we drove what was probably about 45 minutes out into, we're already in a rural area, but we went into an even more rural area. It was dark at night, and we stopped at this dock, got into a boat led by a local guide who took us out into this bay that was surrounded by really dramatic mangroves. And so it was this almost eerie setting. The moon is just about full, and there were lots of stars out, and it was just breathtakingly beautiful. And we just went out into the middle of this bay. It was totally dark except for one light that the boat had, and he would keep it off and only flash it whenever he needed to if there were other boats around. And gradually there were no other boats around, and we started to see these kind of triangular tent structures on the surface of the water. And so what we were doing out there was we were going to see the bioluminescent phytoplankton that this particular bay is known for around here. And so, but the problem is, which of course is not a problem, but was that the moon was so bright that if you wanted to see the bioluminescence, you had to be in a dark setting. So you had to go into that. They built these tent structures that you would have to go under to see the bioluminescence. And so when we dropped anchor at one of these tents, again, it was open water, pitch black night. The water was deep, much deeper than our height. And one by one, the women in the boat jumped into the water, and he explained you had to jump in, swim, and get under this tent, where you would just basically tread water and see the bioluminescence. And one by one, the women got out of the boat, and I stood there and I thought, I don't think I can do this. And I think I even said that out loud. And Karina is not in the position of making people do anything here. That's not the nature of her role. And had I insisted on not going in, I'm sure she would have tried to encourage me, but she wouldn't have forced me. So I sat there for what felt like a long time, but it wasn't, and said, I'm either going to do this or I'm not going to do this. And standing there alone on this boat, I said, I'm going to do this. And I jumped into the water and followed my people who are all now my friends, and got under this tent and proceeded to have what I have to say is probably one of the most magical, mystical experiences of my adult life. I've never seen bioluminescent phytoplankton. I've heard about it, I've seen it, I'm sure, on videos, but having it actually being in the water with it is pretty magnificent. You know, you look at your fingers and your toes and your body parts, and they literally are sparkling like there are tiny stars attached to your hand. And of course, when you move in the water, there's this light that flows, and we were all giddy under that tent. It was just the most magnificent thing any of us had seen. And we were laughing and silly and supporting each other. The oxygen under the tent was low, so we would have to go out. And our lovely guide gave us all life jackets about halfway into it, so we didn't have to tread water anymore. We could just float. And I just felt like I was floating on air. I was so happy. And it was just a special half an hour or so. And afterwards we all got back in the boat and left, and just marveled at the experience. And so this morning when I woke up, the first thing I thought of was I felt really proud of myself. I remembered that whole excursion, and I felt just really proud of myself for having done what I thought was, I was very afraid to jump into open water in the dark of night, in a situation where our guide was somebody I didn't know. And then of course to swim under this tent, which looks really, you just have to have some trust that everything is going to be okay, and that's what I really leaned on. But like going under this tent where you didn't really know what you were doing was scary to me, and I did all of those things and had the reward that I had from it. So that's what I've been thinking about today, is feeling really happy that I kind of conquered in that moment those fears and had this experience that I could never really replicate in any other way, I'm sure. So that's, and I've been thinking about how every day we all have to kind of deal with our fears, both large and small, and that was a big one for me. And so that's kind of where my thoughts are, and I'm just kind of sitting with that today, you know, how to continue to live that way a little bit, keep pushing through some of those fears. And of course I do this with my clients. You know, my own experience I bring to my practice. I don't talk about myself in my sessions with my clients, but I certainly bring myself to the table. And when they are working on their anxiety and their fear, I'm, you know, again, kind of continuing to bring what I have inside of my heart and my head into that work as well. So the song that I'm going to share is a song that I first heard 2 years ago when I was driving my daughter to the Women's March in DC. Maybe it was 3 years ago. And it's a song I'd never heard before, but there's a playlist, you can find it out there, that somebody created, a public playlist, it's super long, that was for the Women's March in DC, and it's amazing, full of great music, really empowering, a lot of feminist kind of themes. In any case, there's a song called Proud by an artist named Heather Small, and again, never heard it before, but the minute I heard it for the first time in this playlist, I said, I've got to save this, it's great for therapy, and I have it on a couple of my playlists now, and it's just, and the tagline in the song is, what have you done today to make you feel proud? And it's just a great motivating song, so I'm going to add that to my playlists, because obviously it's super appropriate to this moment. And actually, I'm going to be leading the art group in a guided imagery exercise later today, finding a safe space, guided imagery meditation, and I'm going to record that and post that as a separate video for today's kind of mind-body work. That particular meditation is obviously very relevant to what's on my mind, and it's a special meditation that I really enjoy, so I'm going to lead the group in one of those, and I will post that separately. Both of these I'll post later today. So, and I'll be thinking about fear and pride, all the rest.